Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There are warriors in the grim darkness of the far future who command respect through fear alone. There are leaders who inspire devotion through their tactical brilliance. And then there is Logan Grimnar, a man who has done something that few in the Imperium of man would dare to contemplate. He looked the Inquisition in the eye, saw their terrible judgment upon innocent souls, and said no. For over 7 centuries, the great wolf of the space wolves has stood as a pillar of defiance against tyranny, even when that tyranny comes wrapped in the authority of the God Emperor himself. He has faced demon primarchs in single combat, commanded armies in humanity's darkest hours, and survived conflicts that would have broken lesser men. But perhaps his most defining moment came not on a blood-soaked battlefield against the enemies of mankind, but in the cold void of space, when he chose to defend those who could not defend themselves, regardless of the cost. This is the saga of Logan Grimnar, the Old Wolf, the Fang Father, the High King of Fenris. This is a tale of honor in a universe that has forgotten its meaning, of compassion in an age of cruelty, and of one man's refusal to compromise his values, even when the entire weight of imperial authority demanded his submission. To understand Logan Grimnar, we must first journey to the world that forged him. Fenris exists as one of the most inhospitable death worlds in the Imperium, a frozen nightmare of endless oceans and shifting continents that would kill an ordinary human in minutes. The planet orbits a sun that floods it with radiation, creating seasons of such extreme temperature that entire continents of ice break apart and reform in different configurations. What passes for summer on Fenris would freeze the blood of anyone not born to its harsh embrace. Upon this frozen hell, humanity has managed not just to survive, but to thrive in its own savage way. The people of Fenris live in scattered tribes, warrior societies that sail the boiling seas in massive longships, hunting the planet's monstrous fauna and warring with rival clans. These are not the cowering masses of humanity found on civilized worlds. These are warriors born, every man and woman tested by Fenris from the moment they draw their first breath. It is from these tribes that the space wolves draw their recruits. High above in the Fang, the mighty fortress monastery carved into the tallest mountain on Fenris, the sky warriors watch and wait. They observe the battles between tribes, the individual acts of courage and strength, seeking those rare individuals who possess the qualities necessary to become one of the Emperor's finest warriors. Not intelligence alone, not strength alone, but that indefinable quality that marks a true hero. The willingness to stand against impossible odds, the courage to face death with a battle cry on one's lips, the loyalty to one's pack that transcends fear of annihilation. The Space Wolves are different from other chapters of the Adeptus Astartes in ways both subtle and profound. While other chapters might prioritize rigid adherence to tactics and protocol, the Wolves embrace a more primal approach to warfare. They are the Emperor's executioners, the hunters, who pursue their prey across the stars with single-minded determination. They fight not with cold calculation alone, but with a fierce joy in battle that harks back to their primarch, the legendary Leman Russ. Leman Russ, the Wolf King, disappeared into the Eye of Terror 10,000 years ago, promising his sons that he would return when they needed him most. Until that day comes, the Space Wolves are led by the Great Wolf, a title that denotes not ownership, but stewardship. The Great Wolf does not claim to rule the chapter, but merely to guide it in Russ's absence. He is first among equals, earning his position through deeds and strength, rather than hereditary right. While this understanding is crucial to grasping what makes Logan Grimnar exceptional even among the great wolves who came before him, he has held his position not for decades, not for a single century, but for over half a millennium. In that time, he has guided the Space Wolves through some of the darkest periods in recent Imperial history, and he has done so while maintaining the fierce independence that defines his chapter. The man who would become the greatest great wolf in the Space Wolves' history began his life as simply Logan, a warrior of the Iron Blood tribe. In the year 313 of the 41st millennium, Logan was already known among his people as a fighter of exceptional skill and courage. He led his crew across the frozen seas of Fenris, raiding rival tribes and hunting the massive sea serpents that could swallow a longship whole. Yet the tribes of Fenris waged constant war upon each other, not out of malice, but because their world demands strength. Only the strong survive the long winters. Only the cunning prosper during the brief summers when the ice recedes. The Iron Bloods were locked in a generations-long conflict with two rival tribes, the Sea Devils and the Ice Fangs, groups of warriors every bit as fierce and determined as Logan's own people. The fateful day came during one of these endless conflicts. Logan and his crew pursued their enemies to the ruins of an ancient temple, a structure dedicated to Morkai, the Fenrisian wolf god who guards the gates of death. These ruins held a sacred significance to all the tribes, but the heat of battle overcame any religious reverence. The Sea Devils, led by their own fierce chieftain Thorgil Icetooth, laid a trap among the broken stones and fallen pillars. The ambush was perfect. The Iron Bloods, confident in their strength, walked directly into the killing ground. What followed was a massacre. One by one, Logan's crew fell to the axes and spears of their enemies. Young warriors who had sailed with him since childhood, men who had shared food and mead around countless fires, died screaming defiance into the cold Fenrisian air. The snow ran red with blood, steam rising from the warm corpses in the frigid atmosphere. Logan watched his brothers die, and something crystallized within him. He would not fall easily. He would not give these enemies the satisfaction of an easy victory. As the last of his crew went down, Logan stood alone atop the altar of Morkai, an axe clutched in each gore-spattered hand. A dozen enemies surrounded him, and their weapons ready, their eyes filled with the anticipation of finishing off this last stubborn warrior. What happened next would become legend among the tribes and within the Space Wolves chapter itself. Logan fought with a fury that seemed to transcend human limitation. His axes became extensions of his will, blurs of crimson movement that opened throats and severed limbs. He moved like one of Fenris's great predators, all controlled violence and terrible purpose. The enemy warriors fell back before his assault, their confidence wavering in the face of such relentless aggression. High above the temple ruins, watching from the mountainside, stood a figure in ancient armor. Wolf Priest Ulrich had been observing Logan for days, following the young warrior's exploits across the frozen seas. He had watched Logan lead daring raids. He'd seen him risk his own life to save wounded crew members, noted the way other warriors looked to him for guidance, even when older, more experienced men were present. Now he witnessed Logan's last stand, and he saw something that confirmed his suspicions. This was no ordinary warrior. This was a hero in the making. Thorgil Icetooth himself finally stepped forward to face Logan. The chieftain of the Sea Devils was a giant, even by Fenrisian standards. His arms thick with muscle developed from a lifetime of pulling oars and swinging weapons. He had killed dozens of men in single combat, had led his tribe to victory after victory. But when his blade met Logan's axes, something shifted in his expression. This young warrior, bleeding from a dozen wounds, standing atop the corpses of his crew, fought with a skill that belied his years. And the duel raged across the altar of Morkai. Steel rang on steel. Blood flew in dark arcs across the ancient stone. Both warriors bore the marks of their savage contest, but neither would yield. Logan's muscles screamed with exhaustion. His vision blurred from blood loss, but his spirit remained unbroken. He would fight until his last breath left his body. That breath never came. Just as Logan's strength began to fail, just as Thorgil raised his axe for what would have been the killing blow, the sky above the temple erupted with light. Massive figures in ancient power armor materialized in flashes of teleportation energy. The terminators of the space wolves had arrived, and their weapons spoke with the thunder of the Emperor's wrath. The sea devils scattered before this divine intervention, recognizing the sky warriors for what they were. Thorgil himself fell, his chest opened by a single burst of storm bolter fire, and Logan, his consciousness fading, felt enormous gauntleted hands lifting him from the blood-soaked altar. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Ulrich's skull-faced helm, leaning close as the wolf priest examined his prize. Logan awoke in the Fang, the massive fortress monastery that served as the Space Wolves' home. The wounds that should have killed him were healing with unnatural speed, the genetic modifications already beginning to reshape his body. But the transformation into a space marine is not merely physical. It is a test of will, a trial that breaks many who attempt it. Ulrich remained close to Logan throughout his transformation, watching and testing. The wolf priest had seen something special in that young warrior fighting his last stand, and he wanted to nurture that quality, to see how far Logan could rise. Other wolf priests might have been content to let nature take its course, but Ulrich saw potential for greatness, and greatness required careful cultivation. The trial of Morkai came early in Logan's training. This ancient rite of passage tests a space wolf's aspirant's courage and cunning in the most direct way possible. Each aspirant is sent alone into the mountains of Fenris to hunt and kill a great beast. Some choose to track the massive elk that roam the peaks. Others hunt the packs of Fenrisian wolves. But the truly ambitious, the ones who would become legends, seek out the most dangerous prey of all. Logan chose to hunt Frostblood, yet an ice troll of such size and ferocity that it had killed dozens of the chapter's aspirants over the centuries. The creature lair was littered with the frozen corpses of would-be heroes, their bodies perfectly preserved in the eternal ice. Some had been scouts, killed before they could even attempt an attack. Others were full space marines, veterans sent to eliminate the threat, whose skill had proven insufficient against the troll's massive strength and cunning. The hunt took Logan deep into a network of ice caves, passages carved by ancient glaciers that groaned and shifted with the planet's geological instability. In the darkness, lit only by the dim glow of bioluminescent fungi, Logan stalked his prey. Every sound was amplified in the confined space. Every breath came out as visible mist in the sub-zero temperature. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, Frostblood waited. The ice troll was enormous, a hulking mass of muscle and rage that had survived for centuries by combining brute strength with a predatory intelligence. Its eyes, adapted to the cave's eternal darkness, spotted Logan long before the aspirant saw it. The attack came with shocking speed for something so massive. One moment Logan was creeping through a narrow passage. The next, he was flying through the air, slammed against the cave wall by a blow that would have pulverized a normal human. Logan's enhanced physiology saved him from instant death, but the impact still drove the air from his lungs and cracked ribs. He had only seconds before Frostblood would be upon him again, and his weapons had been knocked from his hands in the initial assault. All around him lay the frozen remains of those who had failed this same trial, their bodies half buried in ice. In that moment of desperation, Logan's hand closed around a bone, a femur from some long-dead warrior, frozen solid and sharp where it had broken. It was not much of a weapon against a creature that could shrug off bolter fire, but it was what he had. As Frostblood charged again, its massive jaws opening to crush him, Logan jammed the bone upward with all his enhanced strength. The improvised weapon drove through the troll's eye and into its brain. Frostblood's momentum carried it forward even as it died, its massive jaws closing on Logan's arm with bone-crushing force. The aspirant's scream echoed through the ice caves, a howl of pain and triumph mixed together. He had won, but the victory cost him dearly. His arm was mangled, savaged by the troll's fangs, even as the light faded from its remaining eye. When the wolf priests found him hours later, Logan was still locked in the dead troll's grip, his face pressed against the creature's snout. The priests had to pry the jaws apart to free him, and even then, Logan refused to show weakness. He had passed the trial of Morkai. joining the ranks of those worthy to become true space wolves. The scars on his arm would remain for the rest of his life, a permanent reminder of the day he killed Frostblood, with nothing but a broken bone and an indomitable will. The years that followed saw Logan's continued rise through the chapter's ranks. He proved himself in battle after battle, his tactical acumen matching his combat prowess. Other warriors looked to him for leadership, even when he held no official rank. His ability to inspire loyalty became legendary within the chapter. Men who would have balked at following another warrior into certain death would charge headlong into the enemy when Logan led them. Ulrich continued to guide Logan's development, teaching him the history and traditions of the Space Wolves. The young warrior learned of Leman Russ and the Great Crusade, of the Horus Heresy and the long millennia since. He studied the sagas of past great wolves, the legendary warriors who had led the chapter through its darkest hours. And all the while, Ulrich watched, testing, pushing, preparing Logan for a destiny that even the wolf priest could only dimly perceive. Logan's service in the Wolf Guard of Wolf Lord Asvald further refined his abilities. The Wolf Guard are the elite veterans of each great company, what warriors who have proven themselves time and again in the crucible of combat. To be chosen for the Wolf Guard is an honor that most space wolves aspire to their entire lives. Logan achieved it through sheer excellence, his deeds speaking louder than any words. During the Makarian Crusade in the 390s of the 41st Millennium, Logan accompanied Ulrich on a mission to claim the Fist of Russ, a legendary artifact of the chapter. This brought him into contact with Lord Solar Macarius, one of the greatest Imperial commanders in history. The young Logan fought alongside Macarius's forces, witnessing firsthand how a truly great leader could inspire millions to achieve the impossible. The relationship between Logan and Macarius grew into genuine respect. The Lord Solar saw in the Space Wolf a kindred spirit, and someone who understood that leadership required more than just giving orders. It required being willing to stand at the front of the charge, to risk everything alongside those you led. Logan learned lessons during the Makarian Crusade that would shape his own leadership style for centuries to come, but all things must end. In the year 415 of the 41st Millennium, Wolf Lord Asvald fell in battle against hordes of greenskin Xenos at the Cyclopean Rift. The loss of such a legendary warrior sent shockwaves through the chapter. Asvald had been a great wolf in waiting, a leader whose tactical brilliance and combat prowess made him seem invincible. His death reminded everyone that even the mightiest can fall. The members of Asvald's Wolf Guard gathered to choose his successor, as was tradition. Yet no one was surprised when their unanimous choice fell upon Logan Grimnar. He had earned their respect and loyalty through countless battles. He had proven his worth time and again. Now he would lead them as their Wolf Lord, commanding his own great company. Logan renamed his company the Champions of Fenris, also known as the Night Runners. Under his leadership, they would become one of the most feared great companies in the chapter, striking from the darkness to destroy the Emperor's enemies wherever they hid. But Logan's time as simply a Wolf Lord would be brief. Fate had other plans. In the year 440 of the 41st Millennium, Great Wolf Sigvald Grimhammer was murdered by a Dark Elder succubus during a raid on an Imperial world. The loss of a great wolf is always a tragedy, but Sigvald's death was particularly shocking in its suddenness. The Dark Eldar are cunning, vicious fighters, but for one to successfully kill a great wolf spoke to either exceptional skill or terrible luck. Once again, the Wolf Lords of the Space Wolves gathered to choose their new leader. The selection of a great wolf is not a simple matter. The chosen warrior must be respected by all the great companies. He must be wise enough to guide the chapter's strategy, fierce enough to inspire his warriors in battle, and diplomatic enough to deal with the other powers within the Imperium. He must be a warrior, a general, and a politician all at once. The choice fell upon Logan Grimnar. At barely more than a century old by Space Marine standards, he was young for such responsibility. Other Wolf Lords had served for longer, had more experience, had led more campaigns. Oh, but there was something about Logan that marked him as exceptional. Perhaps it was the way he inspired absolute loyalty in those who served under him. Perhaps it was his tactical genius, proven in battle after battle. Or perhaps it was simply that the Space Wolves recognized in him the same quality that had caused a young tribal warrior to stand alone against impossible odds atop an altar to Morkai. Logan accepted the position with characteristic humility. He understood that he was not the master of the Space Wolves, but merely their caretaker until Leman Russ returned. This understanding would guide his leadership for the next 7 centuries, as he led the chapter through some of the most tumultuous periods in recent Imperial history. One relationship that would prove crucial to Logan's long reign was his connection with Bjorn the Fell-Handed. Bjorn is unique in the entire Imperium, a living link to the time of the Horus Heresy 10,000 years ago. Once a mortal warrior who fought alongside Leman Russ himself, Bjorn had been mortally wounded and interred within the armored sarcophagus of a dreadnought. For 10 millennia, he had slept between battles, awakening only in the chapter's greatest hours of need. When Bjorn speaks, even the Great Wolf listens. The ancient dreadnought serves as the chapter's moral compass, the embodiment of its oldest traditions and values. He remembers the Emperor not as the god figure worshipped by the Imperium, but as the man he was during the Great Crusade. He remembers Leman Russ not as a legendary Primarch, but as the Wolf King who led the 6th Legion across the stars. Logan's relationship with Bjorn would be tested many times over the centuries, but it was built on mutual respect. Bjorn saw in Logan the same qualities he had admired in the greatest warriors of the Heresy era. Logan, for his part, recognized that Bjorn's wisdom came from actual experience spanning 10,000 years. When the Ancient One spoke, the Great Wolf had the wisdom to listen. This became crucial in the aftermath of what would be called the Months of Shame, when Bjorn's intervention alone prevented the Space Wolves from plunging into a conflict that could have destroyed them. But that story begins with a different battle, a conflict against an enemy so terrible that only the combined might of the Space Wolves and the secret chapter of demon hunters called the Grey Knights could hope to prevail. The first war for Armageddon began not with a declaration, but with a rip in reality itself. The Space Hulk, known as Devourer of Stars, emerged from the warp near the hive world of Armageddon, a massive conglomeration of ships fused together by the malign energies of the Imperium. Such space hulks are always dangerous, often containing hordes of Xenos creatures or lost technology. But Devourer of Stars carried something far worse. Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters Legion, had returned to real space. Once he had been one of the Emperor's own sons, a warrior of superhuman ability created to lead humanity's armies in the Great Crusade. But during the Horus Heresy, Angron had turned to chaos, embracing the blood god Horn. Now he was something beyond even a Primarch's might. He was a demon prince, an entity of pure violence and rage given terrible form. With Angron came the World Eaters, his corrupted space marines who had followed him into damnation. They were accompanied by chaos cultists who had worshipped the dark gods for generations, waiting for this moment when the veil between reality and the warp would thin enough for their masters to cross over. The forces of chaos descended upon Armageddon like a red tide of blood and brass. The initial Imperial response was catastrophic. The planetary defense forces, though brave and well-equipped by Imperial standards, were utterly overwhelmed. These were mortal men and women facing horrors from beyond human comprehension, Chaos Space Marines, yet each one a veteran of countless wars across 10,000 years. Demons of Khorne, entities of living bloodlust that could not be killed by conventional weapons. And at the center of it all, Angron himself, a being of such power that his mere presence warped reality. Armageddon Prime, one of the planet's main continents, fell swiftly. The hives, massive city structures that housed millions of people, became slaughterhouses. The Chaos Forces showed no mercy, for mercy was a concept utterly alien to the followers of Khorne. They took no prisoners, sought no converts. They simply killed, offering up the souls of the fallen to their thirsty god. But the forces of chaos had made one critical error in their timing. The Space Wolves had recently been assigned to this sector of space, and when the call for help reached them, they responded with characteristic swiftness. Logan Grimnar, now fully established as Great Wolf, led his warriors to Armageddon's defense. This would be his first truly great test as the chapter's leader, and the stakes could not have been higher. Logan arrived to find an Imperial defense in disarray. The remaining forces on Armageddon Secundus, the planet's other major continent, were holding out, but barely. Morale was at the breaking point. Soldiers who had fought bravely against Xenos invasions or heretic uprisings found themselves facing something beyond their comprehension. The only thing preventing complete collapse was the stubborn determination of the Armageddon Steel Legion, the planet's elite military force. The Great Wolf immediately took command. His presence alone reinvigorated the defense. Our Space Marines are psychologically conditioned to know no fear, and the Space Wolves in particular radiate an aura of confidence that inspires mortal troops. Logan moved among the defenders, organizing them, positioning his own warriors where they could do the most good, preparing for the inevitable counterattack by chaos. When Angron's forces turned their attention to Armageddon Secundus, they expected to find the same broken defenders they had crushed on Armageddon Prime. Instead, they found an Imperial force that had been transformed into a proper army. The Space Wolves held the critical positions, their superior firepower and tactical expertise multiplying the effectiveness of the mortal troops around them. Logan had turned a rabble on the verge of collapse into a force capable of standing against the armies of chaos. The battle was joined on the banks of the River Charon, a mile-wide waterway that served as a natural defensive position. Logan positioned his forces expertly, using the river to channel the chaos assault into kill zones where his warriors could bring overwhelming firepower to bear. The World Eaters, driven by their endless hunger for blood and slaughter, charged directly into these prepared positions. The slaughter was immense on both sides. Chaos Space Marines fell to precise bolter fire from the Space Wolves. Imperial Guard soldiers died by the hundreds as Berserker warriors broke through the lines. The river itself ran red with blood, steam rising from the warm corpses in the frigid water. Logan fought at the forefront of the battle, his axes reaping a terrible toll among the enemy. And it was during this battle that Logan claimed the weapon that would become his signature, the Axe Morkai, a mighty lord of the World Eaters. His armor covered in the brass symbols of Horn challenged the Great Wolf to single combat. The Chaos Champion wielded a massive axe, its blade glowing with barely contained warp energies, forged by Khorne himself as a gift to his most devoted followers. The duel between Logan and the Chaos Lord raged across the battlefield. The champion was ancient, his experience spanning millennia of warfare. He had killed hundreds of worthy opponents, had bathed in rivers of blood, had pleased his dark god with endless sacrifice. But Logan fought with a fury that matched the Berserker's own, tempered by tactical thinking that the Chaos Champion had long since abandoned. When Logan's own weapons shattered against the Chaos Lord's demon-forged armor, the Great Wolf did not hesitate. He closed with his enemy, catching the descending axe with his bare gauntlets. The weapon's edge bit into the ceramite, but Logan held firm. With a twist of his massive strength, he wrenched the axe from his opponent's grip. Before the Chaos Champion could recover, Logan buried the demon weapon in its former master's skull. The Axe Morkai, as Logan would rename it, was a weapon of terrible power. Forged by Horn, it vibrated with malign energies that would have corrupted a lesser warrior. But Logan Grimnar was no lesser warrior. He claimed the axe as his own, had it reforged and reconsecrated in the image of Morkai, the Fenrisian wolf god. The weapon retained its fearsome power while being bent to Logan's will, and a symbol of the Great Wolf's ability to take the enemy's own strength and turn it against them. But even with this victory, Logan knew the truth. The Space Wolves alone, no matter how skilled, could not defeat Angron. A demon Primarch is a being of such power that conventional weapons barely scratch it. Angron had slaughtered hundreds of Grey Knights during the Horus Heresy. He had faced down entire armies and emerged victorious. To truly banish him back to the warp would require forces beyond what even the Space Wolves possessed. Logan made the decision to call for the Grey Knights. This was not done lightly. The Grey Knights are the chamber militant of the Ordo Malleus, the demon-hunting arm of the Inquisition. Their very existence is one of the Imperium's most closely guarded secrets. Most Imperial citizens, even most Space Marines, do not know they exist. But as a great wolf, Logan had access to knowledge denied to ordinary warriors. He knew of the Grey Knights, and he knew they were the only force in the galaxy specifically created to fight the demonic. The Grey Knights answered the call with characteristic swiftness. A hastily assembled brotherhood of these elite demon hunters, 109 Terminators strong, made all haste to Armageddon. With them came over 30 Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus, including the enigmatic Inquisitor, Lord Gesme Kisnaros. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine Armageddon's fate. The final battle occurred when Angron led his forces in a massive assault against the Imperial lines. The demon Primarch was accompanied by the Cruor Praetoria, his bodyguard of 12 bloodthirsters. Each of these greater demons was itself a being of terrible power, capable of slaughtering entire companies of Space Marines. Together, they formed a spearhead of demonic fury that nothing could stand against. Logan held his forces back, waiting for the perfect moment. The Space Wolves and the Armageddon Steel Legion maintained their positions, pouring fire into the advancing Chaos Horde. Casualties mounted on both sides. The entire fate of the Cadian sector seemed to balance on a knife's edge. And then, when Angron committed himself fully to the assault, when he was deep within the Imperial lines and surrounded by his demon bodyguard, Logan played his ace.
You know, stepping back from all the lore for a moment, what really strikes me about Logan's story is how it challenges everything we think we know about the Imperium. Here you have this massive authoritarian regime where individual lives supposedly mean nothing, where billions are sacrificed without a second thought, and yet Logan looks at innocent soldiers who just saved their own world and says, "No, I won't let you murder them." That's not just brave, that's revolutionary in the context of Warhammer. What makes it even more fascinating is that he wins. Not through some deus ex machina, but through sheer stubborn refusal to back down. He proves that even in the grimdark future, one person standing up for what's right can actually make a difference. That's why Logan resonates with so many fans. He's not just another overpowered character swinging a big axe. He's someone who maintains his humanity in a universe designed to strip it away. And honestly, that makes him more heroic than any number of battlefield victories ever could. But yeah, anyways, let's get back to the story.
The Grey Knights teleported directly into the center of the demon army, as their arrival was heralded by a brilliant flash of psychic lightning, as their wards and protective prayers clashed with the raw malevolence emanating from Angron and his Cruor Praetoria. The Grey Knights were the Emperor's finest demon hunters, each one a powerful psyker as well as a peerless warrior. Their force weapons, capable of severing a demon's connection to the material realm, sang through the air as they engaged the enemy. The cost was terrible. Angron, in his rage, cut down 5 Grey Knight Terminators with a single stroke of his massive demon blade, the Black Blade. The weapon was an artifact of such power that even the psychic wards of the Grey Knight's armor could not fully protect them. The bloodthirsters of the Cruor Praetoria slaughtered dozens more, their brass axes reaping a harvest of noble souls. But the Grey Knights had not come unprepared. Among their number was a young warrior named Hyperion, barely more than a novice by the standards of his chapter. But Hyperion possessed a gift, a psychic talent that allowed him to perceive the threads of fate and probability. In the chaos of battle, he saw his moment. As Angron raised the Black Blade to strike down another Grey Knight, Hyperion struck first, his force weapon shattering the demon weapon. The loss of the Black Blade changed the entire dynamic of the battle. Angron was still a being of immense power, but without his greatest weapon, the Grey Knights gained the advantage they needed. Their Terminators closed in, their force weapons striking again and again. Each blow weakened Angron's connection to the material realm, each psychic assault disrupting the warp energies that sustained his manifestation. At the same time, the Space Wolves launched their own massive counterattack. Logan led the charge personally, the Axe Morkai blazing with unholy fire. The irony was not lost on anyone that a weapon forged by Khorne was being used to banish Khorne's own champion. The World Eaters and Chaos Cultists, seeing their leader embattled, tried to come to his aid, but the Imperial forces held them back. The final banishment of Angron required the combined efforts of the remaining Grey Knights, channeling their psychic power in a ritual of exorcism that had not been performed in centuries. The demon Primarch's screams of rage echoed across the battlefield as he was torn from reality, cast back into the warp. With their leader gone, yet the forces of chaos began to crumble. The World Eaters fought on with suicidal fury, but without Angron to lead them, they were just scattered warbands. The Imperial forces, reinvigorated by their victory, pushed forward. Within days, the last of the Chaos Invaders had been eliminated or driven off-world. Armageddon was saved. The cost had been horrific, millions dead, entire hives reduced to rubble. But the planet survived, and with it, one of the Imperium's most important industrial centers. Logan Grimnar had proven his worth as Great Wolf, demonstrating the tactical brilliance and courage that would define his entire reign. The Grey Knights had suffered terrible casualties, but they had fulfilled their purpose, banishing one of the most powerful demon princes in existence. But the victory came with a price that Logan could never have anticipated. The Inquisition, in its infinite paranoia, was about to make a decision that would set the Great Wolf on a collision course with Imperial authority itself. A decision that would result in the months of shame, a secret conflict that nearly tore the Imperium apart from within. The purges began quietly, almost as soon as the last shots of the battle had faded. The Inquisition's reasoning was coldly logical from their perspective. Millions of Imperial citizens, both civilian and military, had been exposed to the corruption of chaos. They had seen demons with their own eyes, witnessed the reality of the warp's malign influence. Even those who had fought bravely against these horrors could not be trusted. Chaos corruption could take years to manifest. And a loyal soldier today might become tomorrow's heretic, spreading the taint to others. The solution, in the Inquisition's view, was total containment. Every civilian who had survived the war would be sterilized and placed in labor camps, worked to death, while Armageddon was repopulated with citizens from other worlds who knew nothing of what had transpired. The Armageddon Steel Legion regiments that had fought so bravely would be dispersed, their troopships destroyed in transit to eliminate any possibility of them spreading tales of what they had witnessed. Even the Imperial Navy crews who had participated in the orbital defense would be purged. It was a death sentence for millions of innocent people whose only crime was surviving, and it was absolutely standard inquisitorial procedure. Or Logan Grimnar was familiar with how the Ordo Malleus operated. He had dealt with the Inquisition before, had clashed with them over their methods. He suspected that they would attempt something like this, and he had extracted promises from both the Inquisition and the Grey Knights that the defenders of Armageddon would be spared. These brave men and women had stood against impossible odds. They deserved better than to be herded into camps and slowly worked to death. The promises, Logan soon discovered, had been lies. Inquisitor Lord Gesme Kisnaros commanded the containment operation. Kisnaros was an enigma even to other Inquisitors. Young in appearance despite his rank, he was unaligned with any of the Inquisition's major orders, operating under some higher authority that he never revealed. And his mandate was absolute: ensure that knowledge of the demon incursion did not spread beyond Armageddon, regardless of the cost. When Logan learned that the purges were beginning despite the assurances he had been given, his fury was terrible to behold. These were not cultists or heretics being executed. These were loyal Imperial citizens, soldiers who had given everything to defend their world. To simply exterminate them was a betrayal of everything the Imperium claimed to stand for. The Great Wolf made his decision with characteristic directness. He would save as many of the survivors as possible, even if it meant defying the Inquisition itself. Logan kept his massive fleet in orbit over Armageddon, a silent threat to anyone who might try to forcibly implement the Purge. When transport ships began moving the Armageddon Steel Legion regiments off-world, ostensibly to new assignments, the Space Wolves fleet moved to escort them. Kisnaros ordered his ships to intercept and destroy the transports. Logan's forces protected them, using their superior firepower to keep the Inquisition vessels at bay. It was a dance on the edge of civil war. The Space Wolves never fired first, never gave Kisnaros the excuse he needed to declare them renegades. But they made it clear that any ship attempting to destroy transports carrying Armageddon's defenders would have to go through the entire Space Wolves fleet to do so. Many transport ships escaped this way, carrying their precious cargo of soldiers to safety on distant worlds where the Inquisition could not easily reach them. But Logan could not be everywhere. Kisnaros had an entire inquisitorial fleet at his command, along with the Grey Knight's strike cruisers. While the Space Wolves protected some transports, others were destroyed. Entire regiments of the Armageddon Steel Legion died in the cold of space, their ships torn apart by lance strikes before they could even realize they were under attack. Kisnaros's purge expanded beyond just the military survivors. Worlds that had received even a handful of refugees from Armageddon were subjected to exterminatus. Entire planetary populations exterminated to ensure the containment of information. The Adeptus Mechanicus outpost of Priam Novus was destroyed. The worlds of Gendara Quintus and Tybalt were reduced to lifeless rocks. Even an Adeptus Astra Telepathica station was obliterated when it was discovered that a few survivors had passed through. Yet the scale of the killing was staggering. Billions dead, not from enemy action, but from the Inquisition's paranoid determination to suppress all knowledge of the Chaos incursion. And through it all, Logan Grimnar fought to save who he could, his fury at the Inquisition's actions growing with each new atrocity. Within the inquisitorial fleet itself, dissent was building. Many inquisitors had voted against the scope of the purges from the beginning. They understood the logic of containment, but what Kisnaros was doing went far beyond reasonable precaution into mass murder. Even some of the Grey Knights began to question their role in the campaign. They were demon hunters, created to fight the forces of the warp, being used to slaughter Imperial citizens, even in the name of preventing chaos corruption, felt wrong. The Grey Knights themselves began calling it the Months of Shame, a name that captured their deep discomfort with the entire situation. They had lost dozens of their brothers fighting Angron on Armageddon. Those warriors had died heroically, giving their lives to save the Imperium from a terrible threat. Now they were being asked to kill the very people they had bled to protect. The shame of it weighed heavily on many of them. Inquisitor Annika Jarlsdotter, a member of the Ordo Malleus, who happened to be Fenrisian by birth, became increasingly vocal in her opposition to Kisnaros. She saw in Logan's actions not rebellion, but a great wolf doing what any leader should do, protecting those under his care. The fact that the Space Wolves never fired first, never gave the Inquisition legitimate cause to declare them renegades, has made it clear that Logan was trying to avoid all-out war, even as he opposed the purges. The crisis reached its first major flashpoint when Kisnaros arranged a meeting with Logan in neutral space, ostensibly to negotiate a truce. The Great Wolf, hoping that some accommodation could be reached, agreed to attend. What he did not know was that Kisnaros had already decided that negotiation was pointless. The Inquisitor Lord had concluded that only forcing the Space Wolves into submission would end the conflict. The meeting was a trap from the start. As Logan's delegation arrived, Kisnaros gave the order to fire on the Space Wolves' fleet. The Grey Knights and Inquisition ships opened up with a devastating barrage, catching the Wolves completely off guard. 4 Space Wolves vessels were destroyed outright. A 5th was crippled. drifting helplessly in space. The betrayal was absolute. Logan had come in good faith to negotiate, and Kisnaros had responded with treachery. The Inquisitor Lord's plan was simple: take Logan hostage and force the Space Wolves to submit to his authority. With their Great Wolf in custody, the chapter would have no choice but to accept the Inquisition's demands. Logan was brought aboard a Grey Knight strike cruiser, ostensibly to discuss his surrender. Instead, he found himself face to face with the man responsible for the attack. Grandmaster Joros of the Grey Knights stood beside Kisnaros, his silver armor gleaming in the ship's harsh lighting. It was Joros who had given the order to fire on the Space Wolves' ships during the supposed truce. When Logan confronted him about this breach of the most basic rules of parley, Joros was unrepentant. He justified his actions by appealing to the greater good, arguing that forcing the Space Wolves to submit was necessary to prevent a wider conflict. The arrogance in his voice was palpable. He genuinely believed that he was doing the right thing, that the ends justified the means. Logan's response was swift and brutal. Before anyone could react, the Great Wolf drew his axe and struck. Joros, confident in his own superiority, had not even drawn his weapons. His force weapons remained sheathed as the axe Morkai descended. The Grandmaster tried to dodge, tried to bring his combat skills to bear, but Logan was faster. The demon blade cleaved through Joros's armor and deep into his body. The Grand Master of the Grey Knights fell, his blood pooling on the deck. Logan's Wolfguard, who had accompanied him to the meeting, erupted into action. Their storm bolters spoke, cutting down the Grey Knights who moved to intercept them. Chaos erupted on the bridge as the Space Wolves fought to escape the trap. The teleportation Homer that should have allowed Logan and his warriors to beam back to their ships had been jammed by Kisnaros's preparations. Trapped aboard an enemy vessel, surrounded by some of the finest warriors in the Imperium, the Space Wolves faced what should have been certain death. But they were not just any Space Marines. They were the Great Wolf's chosen companions, warriors who had fought beside Logan for decades or even centuries. They fought like the wolves they were named for, savage and relentless. Of 4 Grey Knights, Justicars fell to their storm bolt of fire before the Space Wolves' teleporter finally cycled through the jamming, pulling them back to safety. But the damage was done. Logan Grimnar had killed a Grandmaster of the Grey Knights. The Inquisition now had all the justification it needed to declare the Space Wolves renegades. The conflict escalated rapidly after this. Kisnaros, his face twisted with fury at losing his hostage, began planning an even more extreme measure. If he could not force Logan to submit through the threat of military action, he would strike at what the Great Wolf valued most. He would strike at Fenris itself. The plan was audacious in its scope. Kisnaros assembled an entire battle fleet, including the full strength of the Red Hunter's Space Marine chapter. This force would travel to Fenris and threaten the Space Wolves' homeworld with destruction, unless Logan agreed to the Inquisition's demands. The Great Wolf would face an impossible choice: submit to a penitent crusade and accept the Inquisition's authority, or watch his world burn. There were those within the Inquisition itself who saw the madness in this plan. Some Inquisitors had begun plotting to assassinate Kisnaros, believing that his obsession with bringing the Space Wolves to heel had driven him to reckless extremes. But before these plans could come to fruition, the Inquisitor Lord's fleet was already on its way to Fenris. What Kisnaros did not know was that most of the Space Wolves chapter was deployed across the galaxy on various campaigns. The Fang, though one of the most formidable fortresses in the entire Imperium, but was only lightly garrisoned. The threat to Fenris was very real. A full inquisitorial battle fleet, backed by another Space Marine chapter, could potentially overwhelm the defenders if it came to actual warfare. The Space Wolves had one card left to play. Deep within the Fang's armored vaults, ancient beyond measure and revered above all others, Bjorn, the Fell-Handed, was awakened from his long sleep. The oldest warrior in the Imperium, the last living Space Marine to have fought alongside the Emperor himself, had been summoned to save his chapter once more. When Kisnaros arrived at Fenris to deliver his ultimatum, he found Bjorn waiting for him. The ancient dreadnought had been brought to the meeting hall, his massive form dominating the space. Even Kisnaros, hardened by decades in the Inquisition's service, he felt a moment of awe in the presence of this living relic of the Imperium's glory days. The Inquisitor Lord repeated his demands. The Space Wolves must acknowledge the Inquisition's authority. Logan Grimnar must submit to censure and lead his chapter on a penitent crusade. The chapter must accept that they had erred in their defiance. Only then would Kisnaros withdraw his fleet and allow Fenris to remain unharmed. Bjorn's response has become legend among the Space Wolves. The ancient dreadnaught's voice, amplified through his sarcophagus's vox systems, filled the hall. He spoke of service to the Emperor spanning 10,000 years. He spoke of battles fought and won long before the Inquisition even existed. And he told Kisnaros, in terms that left no room for misunderstanding, exactly what he thought of faceless bureaucrats demanding that the Space Wolves prostrate themselves. The Inquisitor Lord was unmoved. He believed that his position was unassailable, that the threat to Fenris would force even Bjorn to see reason. But he had made a critical error in judgment. He had assumed that the Space Wolves would value their homeworld above their pride. As the tense standoff in the Fang continued, Logan Grimnar was making his way back to Fenris with the bulk of the chapter's fleet. When word reached him of Kisnaros' threat, the Great Wolf's response was immediate. Every Space Wolf ship that could be mustered was ordered to the homeworld. They would not allow this threat to stand. The Space Wolves' fleet that emerged from the warp above Fenris was massive. 8 battle barges, 30 strike cruisers, and dozens of smaller vessels. It was a show of force that made it clear the Space Wolves were prepared to fight if necessary. Kisnaros found himself in an impossible position. His inquisitorial fleet was formidable, but against the combined might of the Space Wolves, the outcome was far from certain. What followed was a tense standoff that lasted hours. Both fleets maneuvered for position, weapons ready, but neither side firing the first shot. On the surface, Bjorn continued to debate with Kisnaros, buying time for Logan to arrive. The ancient dreadnought made it clear that the Space Wolves would not surrender, would not bend, would not compromise their principles no matter the threat. Finally, Kisnaros played his last card. He called for a final meeting aboard his flagship, Coral's Hope. He invited Logan, along with representatives from the Grey Knights and neutral Inquisitors, to negotiate one last time. The Inquisitor Lord chose Grey Knight Hyperion, who had gained the respect of the Space Wolves for his role in defeating Angron, and Inquisitor Jarlsdottir, the Fenrisian, who had been vocal in her opposition to the purges. These choices were deliberate. Kisnaros wanted witnesses he could point to, proof that he had tried every avenue for peace. If negotiations failed and war erupted, he wanted to be able to claim he had done everything possible to avoid it. Logan, knowing this might be a trap, but willing to try one more time to find a peaceful resolution, agreed to board Coral's Hope. But he came prepared. 20 of his finest Wolfguard Terminators accompanied him, their weapons ready. If this was to be another betrayal, the Inquisition would pay dearly for it. The meeting took place on the flagship's bridge. Kisnaros stood near his command throne, flanked by Grey Knights and Inquisitorial stormtroopers. Logan and his Wolfguards spread out, tactically positioning themselves around the bridge. Hyperion and Jarlsdottir stood between the two groups, trying to broker some kind of accord. The negotiations went nowhere. Kisnaros repeated his demands. Logan rejected them absolutely. The Great Wolf made it clear that he would die before he allowed the Inquisition to dictate terms to the Space Wolves. The Space Wolves had served the Emperor faithfully for 10,000 years. They would not submit to the authority of an organization that murdered innocent Imperial citizens and then tried to cover up its crimes. As the argument intensified, Logan made his move. But with the speed that had allowed him to kill Grandmaster Joros, the Great Wolf charged across the bridge. His Wolfguard erupted into action, their stormbolters cutting down anyone who tried to intercept their leader. Kisnaros, standing near his command throne, had only seconds to react. The Inquisitor Lord was a powerful psyker. He could have defended himself with telekinetic shields, could have struck back with psychic lightning, but in that crucial moment, he did nothing. Perhaps he was too shocked by the great wolf's audacity. Perhaps he had simply accepted his fate. Or perhaps, on some level, he knew that he deserved what was coming. The axe Morkai descended in a single perfect arc. Kisnaros's head separated from his shoulders, the cornate weapon cutting through flesh and bone with ease. The Inquisitor Lord died instantly, but his body crumpling to the deck as his head rolled away. But killing Kisnaros was not enough to satisfy the Space Wolves' rage. The Wolf Guard continued their rampage, determined to slaughter everyone aboard the ship. The bridge became a charnel house as stormbolter fire and close combat filled the air with blood and screams. It was Bjorn who ended the madness. The ancient dreadnought, monitoring the situation from Fenris, teleported directly onto the bridge of Coral's Hope. His arrival was like a physical force, his presence commanding instant attention from everyone present. "Stop this madness!" Bjorn's voice boomed across the bridge, cutting through the chaos. Even in the heat of battle, the Space Wolves immediately ceased fire. Logan, standing over Kisnaros's corpse with his axe still dripping blood, turned to face the Ancient One. The Great Wolf knew what Bjorn was going to say. The war had to end. They had made their point. Continuing would only lead to the destruction they had sought to avoid. Bjorn's intervention saved both sides from a conflict that would have devastated them. The Grey Knights, though furious at the death of Grandmaster Yoros, recognized the truth in Bjorn's words. The other Inquisitors present, particularly Jarlsdottir, used the opportunity to broker an immediate ceasefire. Neither side had truly wanted this war. Both had been driven to it by Kisnaros's obsession and Logan's refusal to compromise on fundamental principles. The truce that followed was uneasy and incomplete. The Space Wolves agreed to cease their active interference with the Inquisition's operations. The Inquisition agreed to withdraw its forces from Fenris and end the immediate threat to the chapter, but the larger questions remained unresolved. The Space Wolves had defied the Inquisition's authority and gotten away with it. They had killed a Grand Master of the Grey Knights and an Inquisitor Lord. In any normal circumstances, such actions would have resulted in the chapter being declared excommunicate traitoris, hunted down and destroyed by the full might of the Imperium. But these were not normal circumstances. The Space Wolves were a first founding chapter, one of the original legions created by the Emperor himself. They had served faithfully for 10,000 years, and crucially, they had never fired first in any engagement. Every action they took could be justified as defensive. Moreover, there were many within the Inquisition itself who privately agreed with Logan's stance. The purges had been excessive, Kisnaros's methods extreme. While no one would say so publicly, there was a sense that the Inquisitor Lord had gotten what he deserved for trying to hold an entire Space Marine chapter hostage. The aftermath of the months of shame left deep scars on all involved. The Grey Knights had lost a Grand Master and dozens of their brothers, casualties they could ill afford given the chapter's small size. The Space Wolves had lost several ships and hundreds of battle brothers. The Inquisition had been humiliated, forced to back down by a single chapter's determination. More importantly, the fundamental disagreement remained unresolved. While Logan Grimnar would never forgive the Inquisition for what they had done to the defenders of Armageddon, the Inquisition would never forget that the Space Wolves had defied them and suffered no real consequences. An uneasy Cold War existed between them, with both sides watching each other warily, waiting for the next confrontation. For Logan personally, the months of shame cemented his reputation as one of the most formidable chapter masters in the Imperium. He had stood up to the Inquisition itself and won. He had personally killed a Grey Knight's Grandmaster and an Inquisitor Lord. He had defied the most powerful organizations in the Imperium to protect innocent people, and he had done it all while maintaining enough restraint to avoid giving his enemies legitimate cause to destroy his chapter. Yet the axe Morkai had proven its worth during the conflict as well. The weapon that Logan had claimed from a Chaos champion that had been reforged in the image of the Fenrisian death god had now tasted the blood of an Inquisitor Lord. Some whispered that the blade still carried a taint of chaos, that using a weapon forged by Khorne was dangerous no matter how well it had been reconsecrated. But others pointed to Logan's 7 centuries of service without any sign of corruption. The Great Wolf had mastered the weapon completely, turning Chaos's own strength against it. The Axe Morkai would prove its worth again during the siege of the Fenris system, when Magnus the Red himself, the demon Primarch of the Thousand Suns, led an invasion of the Space Wolves' homeworld. The conflict was brutal, with Magnus seeking revenge for the ancient grievances that had driven his legion to chaos during the Horus Heresy. During the final battle, Logan led a desperate defense against Magnus's sorcerous might. The demon Primarch was a being of immense power, his mastery of the warp allowing him to tear reality apart with a gesture. Space Wolves who got too close to him simply ceased to exist, unmade by waves of psychic energy. Even other demon Primarchs would have struggled against Magnus's might. But Logan had the Axe Morkai, and the weapon, forged by Khorne, the blood god who despises all sorcery, proved to be the perfect tool for the task. When Logan managed to land a blow on Magnus, the demon Primarch reeled back in genuine pain. The wound the Axe Morkai inflicted refused to heal, as the Khornate energies disrupting even Magnus's formidable regenerative abilities. Khorne himself, watching from the warp, was said to have laughed at this, one of his own weapons being used to wound the servant of his hated rival Tzeentch, pleased the blood god greatly. The irony was not lost on anyone involved. Magnus, one of the most powerful psykers ever to exist, had been wounded by a weapon that embodied everything he despised. The wound Logan inflicted gave the Grey Knights, who had come to aid the Space Wolves, the opening they needed. While Magnus was distracted by the Great Wolf's assault, the demon hunters channeled their psychic might into a banishment ritual. For the second time, though on a different battlefield, Logan and the Grey Knights worked together to banish a demon Primarch. Magnus was cast back into the warp, while his invasion broken, but victory came at a terrible cost. The Space Wolves had suffered devastating casualties. Entire great companies had been wiped out. Wolf Lord Aegle Iron Wolf, one of Logan's closest friends and most trusted commanders, had fallen in battle against Magnus. The chapter's recruiting pool from the Fenrisian tribes had been severely depleted. The Space Wolves were on the brink of extinction. It was in this darkest hour that Roboute Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, returned to the Imperium at the head of the Indomitus Crusade. With him came the Primaris Space Marines, enhanced warriors created using new techniques developed by the Archmagos Belisarius Cawl. Guilliman offered these new warriors to the Space Wolves, seeking to rebuild their shattered strength. Logan's initial reaction was deep suspicion. While the Space Wolves had always been fiercely independent, drawing their recruits exclusively from Fenris, the idea of accepting warriors who had not been born on their homeworld, who had not proven themselves in the trials that had shaped every Space Wolf since the time of Russ, was anathema to everything the chapter stood for. Moreover, Logan was well aware of Guilliman's history. The returned Primarch had written the Codex Astartes, the tome that had broken the Space Marine legions into smaller chapters after the Horus Heresy. The Space Wolves had always chafed against the restrictions of the Codex, maintaining a larger-than-standard chapter size and organizing themselves according to their own traditions, rather than Guilliman's prescribed structure. Many within the chapter saw Guilliman's offer as a trap, a subtle attempt to bring the Space Wolves into line with the Codex-compliant chapters. Logan called a great council at the Fang, gathering his wolf lords and advisors to debate what should be done. The arguments were passionate and heated. Some wolf lords argued for rejecting the Primaris Marines entirely, maintaining the chapter's purity even if it meant facing extinction. Others pointed out the practical reality that without reinforcements, the Space Wolves could not survive. Logan listened to all arguments, weighing the tradition and independence that defined the Space Wolves against the pragmatic need for survival. In the end, his decision demonstrated the wisdom that had allowed him to lead the chapter for so long. He agreed to accept the Primaris Marines, but on the Space Wolves' terms. These new warriors would not simply be integrated into existing great companies. they would prove themselves worthy of being called Sons of Russ. They would adapt to the Space Wolves' way of war, not the other way around. The decision was controversial, but events proved Logan right. The Primaris Marines took to the Space Wolves' culture surprisingly well. Many of them had been created from the Space Wolves' own gene seed, carrying within them the legacy of Leman Russ, even if they had never set foot on Fenris. Under Logan's leadership, they became true Space Wolves, fierce and loyal, carrying on the traditions that had defined the chapter for 10 millennia. Throughout his centuries of leadership, Logan had demonstrated time and again the qualities that made him exceptional. During the 13th Black Crusade, when Abaddon the Despoiler launched his greatest assault on the Cadian Gate, Logan was selected as Supreme Commander of the Imperial forces. This was an extraordinary honor and responsibility. The Cadian Gate was the Imperium's primary bulwark against the forces of chaos emerging from the Eye of Terror. Its fall would open a path for chaos forces to sweep across the Imperium. Logan's appointment as Supreme Commander was not universally popular. The Inquisition, still bitter about the months of shame, resented having to serve under his authority. Some Imperial Guard generals bristled at taking orders from a Space Marine, no matter how distinguished. But Lord Castellan Ursarkar E. Creed, the legendary military commander who led the defense of Cadia itself, recognized Logan's brilliance and publicly supported his appointment. And under Logan's command, the Imperial forces won key victories against overwhelming odds. At the Battle of Casa Sonnen, Logan and his Space Wolves fought alongside the Dark Angels under Supreme Grand Master Azrael. The two chapters had a long history of rivalry and mutual suspicion, but they put aside their differences to face the common enemy. Their combined forces defeated a chaos army many times their size, demonstrating that when the first founding chapters worked together, they were nearly unstoppable. Logan's tactical acumen was on full display throughout the 13th Black Crusade. He understood that against the massed forces of chaos, the Imperium's best hope lay in coordination and flexibility. He positioned forces where they could support each other, used Space Marine strike forces to plug gaps in the line, and maintained just enough reserves to respond to unexpected threats. While Cadia would eventually fall, that outcome was far from certain during Logan's time as Supreme Commander. If not for his leadership, far more of the Cadian system would have been lost. Logan Grimnar's personal equipment reflects both his status and his long history. He wears the armor of Asphalt Stormrack, a suit of ancient Terminator armor that once belonged to the Wolf Lord, who had been Logan's mentor. The armor has been modified and improved over the centuries, incorporating rare technologies and blessed by the chapter's rune priests. It allows Logan to move with a speed and grace that seems impossible for something so massive, pushing the armor's systems to their absolute limits. The Axe Morkai remains his primary weapon, but it is not his only one. The armor incorporates a storm bolter, allowing Logan to lay down devastating fire even before he closes to melee range. He also commands two massive thunderwolves named Tirnak and Fenrir, creatures native to Fenris that have bonded with him as surely as any packmate. These mighty beasts are formidable combatants in their own right, their jaws capable of crushing power armor, and their loyalty to Logan absolute. For a time, Logan even rode into battle on a massive war chariot called Storm Rider, drawn by Tirnak and Fenrir. This unusual conveyance made the Great Wolf an even more imposing presence on the battlefield, though in recent years he has returned to fighting on foot, his Thunderwolves fighting beside him rather than pulling him into battle. Logan's great company, the Champions of Fenris, are among the finest warriors in the chapter. To be chosen for the Great Wolf's personal company is an honor that every Space Wolf aspires to. These are not just skilled fighters, but warriors who have demonstrated the judgment and character that Logan values above raw combat ability. They are the Space Wolves exemplars, the standard by which all other great companies measure themselves. The Great Wolf also maintains a war council of his most trusted advisors. Ulrich the Slayer, the ancient wolf priest who first recognized Logan's potential centuries ago, remains one of his closest confidants. Despite the vast difference in their ages as space marines, the two share a bond forged through countless battles and mutual respect. Ulrich has mentored some of the greatest leaders the Space Wolves have ever produced, and he considers Logan to be his finest student. Njal Stormcaller, the most powerful rune priest in the chapter, serves as Logan's spiritual advisor and master of psychic warfare. Njal can call down lightning from the skies, summon blizzards that freeze enemies where they stand, and peer into the future to divine the enemy's plans. His counsel has proven invaluable time and again, helping Logan navigate the complex web of threats and opportunities that face the chapter. And of course, there is Bjorn, the Fell-Handed. Though the ancient dreadnought spends most of his time in sleep, when he awakens, his wisdom guides the entire chapter. Logan has learned to listen to Bjorn's counsel, even when it contradicts his own instincts. The Great Wolf understands that Bjorn's perspective, shaped by 10,000 years of experience, provides insights that no one else in the Imperium can match. Logan's personality is a study in contrasts. In battle, he is a whirlwind of violence, his axe Morkai reaping a terrible toll among the enemy. He leads from the front, inspiring his warriors through personal example. His battle cries echo across the battlefield, and his enemies learn to fear the sound of his approach. There are few warriors in the entire Imperium who can match Logan in single combat. He has killed Chaos Lords, alien warlords, and demon primarchs. His list of personal victories reads like a catalogue of the Imperium's greatest threats. But away from the battlefield, Logan displays a surprising depth of compassion and wisdom. He understands that leadership involves more than just tactical brilliance. It requires caring for those under your command, understanding their needs and fears, inspiring them not just through martial prowess, but through genuine connection. The Space Wolves fight for him not because they fear his wrath, but because they would follow him into the jaws of death itself. This compassion was what drove Logan to defy the Inquisition during the months of shame. He could have simply looked the other way, allowed the purges to proceed without interference. Many other chapter masters might have done exactly that, reasoning that the Inquisition's authority superseded any concerns about the fate of mortal soldiers. But Logan could not stand by and watch innocent people be murdered for the crime of surviving. That same compassion has made Logan deeply beloved among the Imperial Guard regiments that fight alongside the Space Wolves. While unlike some chapter masters who view mortal soldiers as expendable resources, Logan treats them with respect. He understands that these men and women face the same horrors as his Space Marines, but without the advantages of power armor and genetic enhancement. Their courage, in his view, is even greater than that of his own warriors. This attitude has gotten Logan into trouble with the Ecclesiarchy and the Administratum on multiple occasions. They view his treatment of mortals as inappropriate, a blurring of the lines between the divine Emperor's angels and ordinary humanity. There have been accusations of heresy, charges of treason, demands that he be censured, but Logan has survived all of them, protected by his chapter's reputation and his own formidable political skills. Because for all his compassion, Logan is no fool. When he understands the Byzantine politics of the Imperium, the complex web of alliances and enmities that determines who rises and who falls, he knows when to push and when to yield, when to make a stand and when to compromise. His survival for over 7 centuries as Great Wolf is testament not just to his combat prowess, but to his understanding of how power works in the Imperium. The Inquisition fears Logan Grimnar, and with good reason. He has proven that he cannot be bullied or intimidated. He has shown that he is willing to fight rather than submit to unjust demands. And most dangerously of all, he has demonstrated that it is possible to defy the Inquisition and survive. That lesson has not been lost on other Space Marine chapters or on other Imperial organizations that chafe under the Inquisition's authority. There are those within the Inquisition who would dearly love to see Logan eliminated, but they face a practical problem. The Space Wolves are too powerful, too well connected, and too respected to be easily destroyed. An attack on Fenris would require a massive commitment of forces, and even if successful, would create a martyr that could inspire other chapters to similar defiance. Better to maintain the uneasy detente, watching Logan carefully, but not provoking another direct confrontation. Logan, for his part, has not forgotten the months of shame. He will never fully trust the Inquisition again. But he is also pragmatic enough to work with them when necessary. When chaos threatens, when Xenos invasions loom, when the Imperium itself is in danger, old grudges must sometimes be set aside. Logan has fought beside Inquisitors he despises, and has coordinated with Grey Knights he would rather avoid, all in service to the greater goal of protecting humanity. This pragmatism extends to his relationships with other Space Marine chapters as well. Despite the ancient rivalry between the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels, Logan has worked with Supreme Grand Master Azrael when the situation demanded it. During the 13th Black Crusade, the two set aside their differences to face Abaddon's forces. Though the alliance was temporary and tensions remained, both leaders recognized that their personal feelings were less important than the defense of the Imperium. Logan has also had to navigate the complex politics surrounding the return of Robu to Guilliman. The Space Wolves have never fully accepted the Codex Astartes, viewing it as an unnecessary restriction on their effectiveness. On Guilliman's return and his position as Lord Commander of the Imperium represented a potential threat to the Space Wolves' independence. But Logan has managed to maintain the chapter's autonomy while still cooperating with Guilliman's indomitous crusade. The key to Logan's success lies in his understanding of what lines cannot be crossed. He defies authority when it conflicts with his core principles, but he does so in ways that make it difficult for his enemies to justify destroying him. He never fires the first shot. He frames his actions as defensive. He maintains just enough respect for the forms and rituals of imperial authority to give his allies political cover. At the same time, Logan is absolutely uncompromising when it comes to the things he truly values, the welfare of those under his protection, and the independence of his chapter, the honor of the Space Wolves' name. On these issues, he will not bend no matter the pressure. This combination of tactical flexibility and strategic firmness has allowed him to navigate the treacherous waters of imperial politics for over 7 centuries. Looking at Logan Grimnar's legacy, what becomes clear is that he represents something increasingly rare in the Imperium of man. He is a leader who genuinely cares about the people he protects, not just as resources to be expended, but as individuals with inherent worth. In a society where human life is cheap and compassion is seen as weakness, Logan's fundamental decency stands out like a beacon. This is not to say that Logan is soft. He has ordered millions to their deaths when tactical necessity demanded it. He has made the hard decisions that come with command, sacrificing the few to save the many, but he has never allowed himself to become numb to the cost. Every life lost weighs on him. Every necessary sacrifice is mourned. This empathy has not weakened him. It has made him stronger, more determined to ensure that the sacrifices made in his name are not wasted. Logan's relationship with his chapter reflects this balance between compassion and ruthlessness. He drives his warriors hard, demanding excellence in all things. The Space Wolves under his command train constantly, honing their skills to a razor's edge. But he also ensures that they understand why they fight, not just for the glory of victory, but for the people who depend on them for protection. Us, the Space Wolves under Logan's leadership, have become known not just as fierce warriors, but as protectors of the innocent. This emphasis on protection, rather than simple destruction, has sometimes put Logan at odds with other imperial authorities. The Inquisition prefers to simply exterminate populations exposed to chaos corruption. Logan prefers to save them when possible, to give them a chance to prove their loyalty rather than assuming their guilt. This fundamental disagreement about the value of human life was at the heart of the months of shame, and it continues to color all of Logan's interactions with the Inquisition. The Space Wolves' recruitment practices under Logan have also evolved to reflect his values. While the chapter still draws primarily from Fenris's warrior tribes, there is now an emphasis on finding recruits who display not just courage and strength, but also compassion and wisdom. Logan understands that the chapter needs more than just killers. It needs leaders, diplomats, and protectors. The trials remain as brutal as ever, but there is a recognition that the qualities that make a great space wolf go beyond mere combat ability. Looking to the future, Logan Grimnar faces challenges as daunting as any he has overcome in the past. The Great Rift has torn the galaxy in half, isolating vast swaths of the Imperium from terror. Chaos forces pour through this wound in reality, in numbers not seen since the Horus Heresy. New Xenos threats emerge constantly. The very fabric of the Imperium seems to be fraying at the edges. But Logan has faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. Here he has stood against demon primarchs and inquisitor lords. He has led the defense of Cardia and survived the siege of Fenris. He has defied the most powerful organizations in the Imperium and maintained his chapter's independence. If anyone can guide the Space Wolves through the dark times ahead, it is the Old Wolf. There are those who whisper that Logan's time is coming to an end. He has led the Space Wolves for over 7 centuries, an extraordinary tenure, even by the standards of Space Marine chapter masters. Only Commander Dante of the Blood Angels has served longer in such a position. Some believe that Logan's eventual death will come in battle, perhaps against the greenskin warlord Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka, with whom he shares a strange connection through mutual respect born of combat. But others believe that Logan will continue to lead the Space Wolves for centuries more. He shows no signs of slowing down, no indication that age is diminishing his abilities. He remains as fierce in battle, as sharp in counsel, as devoted to his chapter as he was when he first became Great Wolf. The same indomitable will that allowed a young tribal warrior to stand alone against impossible odds continues to drive him forward. Whatever the future holds, Logan Grimnar has already secured his place in the annals of Imperial history. He is the Great Wolf who defied the Inquisition and survived. The warrior who wielded a demon weapon without falling to corruption. The leader who valued the lives of common soldiers enough to risk everything to save them. The tactician who led the defense of the Cadian Gate. The hero who wounded Magnus the Red in single combat. But perhaps more importantly, he is the man who showed that it is possible to maintain one's humanity and compassion even in the grim darkness of the far future. In an Imperium defined by cruelty and callousness, Logan Grimnar stands as proof that another way is possible. That leaders can care about those they lead. That the strong can protect the weak rather than simply exploiting them. That honor and duty need not be empty words, but can be principles worth fighting for. The saga of Logan Grimnar is far from over. As long as threats remain to humanity, as long as the Space Wolves draw breath, the Old Wolf will continue to lead them. He will continue to make the hard decisions that come with command. He will continue to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. And he will continue to defy anyone, be they inquisitor or demon, who threatens what he has sworn to protect. This is the legacy of Logan Grimnar, not just a list of victories and defeats, not just a catalogue of enemies slain and battles won. It is the example of a leader who refused to compromise his principles even when the entire weight of imperial authority demanded his submission. It is the story of a warrior who proved that strength without compassion is mere brutality, and that true power comes from the willingness to stand up for what is right, regardless of the cost. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, Logan Grimnar remains a beacon of what the Imperium could be. A reminder that beneath the armor and the genetic modification, beneath the centuries of warfare and the weight of command, there still beats the heart of that young tribal warrior who stood alone atop an altar to Morkai and refused to surrender. The Great Wolf endures, and as long as he leads the Space Wolves, there remains hope that humanity's defenders might still remember what they are fighting for. Not just survival, not just the endless grind of warfare, but the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. The defense of the innocent, the preservation of what makes us human, even in the face of an uncaring universe. This is the saga of Logan Grimnar, the great wolf who defied the Inquisition. And like all the greatest sagas, it is a story that inspires us to be better than we are, to stand up for what we believe in, and to never surrender in the face of impossible odds. If you found this deep dive into Logan Grimnar's legendary saga compelling, hey, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The grim darkness of the far future holds countless more stories waiting to be told, and I'll be here to guide you through them all. Until next time, may the Emperor protect.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.